You're listening to Cannabis Market Insights with your host, Jason Keene.
Hi, everybody. You're tuning into Cannabis Market Insights, a regular podcast series affiliated with Infocast line of cannabis summits. My name is Jason Keene. I'm your host for the podcasts, and we'll be talking to all kinds of cannabis industry leaders, activists, investors, stakeholders, policymakers, regulators. And we'll be exploring both the wide horizons of cannabis as a movement and an industry, as well as the nuts and bolts aspects of the cannabis supply chain and its many niches, let's say. Today, we're going to be talking to Troy Dayton, who is CEO over at the ArcView Group. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Troy or the ArcView Group, ArcView is the preeminent hub for Canada investing and has been since 2010, basically. And Troy is not just a quote-unquote money guy, but he's a longtime policy activist going way back and still plays a role on the board of Marijuana Policy Project and NCIA. So with that little sketch of a background, we'll let Troy fill in the rest of the details, and stay tuned. Hi, everybody out there, and thanks for tuning in. So we are chatting today with Troy Dayton with ArcView, and some of you will be familiar with Troy, but I thought we'd just, before we kind of get going into sort of the big issues, Troy, do you want to just give a little bit of a background bio?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I run the ArcView Group. I'm CEO, co-founder of the ArcView Group, and ArcView is sort of the center of the hub of investment in the cannabis sector at the moment, and we have a group of about 600 high net worth accredited investors, family offices, large companies that are looking to make acquisitions, that have placed over $200 million into over 190 companies in the cannabis sector. So many of the big names that you know today, they were on our stage in their seed rounds, and now increasingly more the larger companies are coming back through as well. So that's kind of where we sit today. We also publish the state of legal marijuana markets and a number of other market reports on the cannabis sector. And it's through that we're the most quoted company in the cannabis sector. And then I also serve on the board of the Marijuana Policy Project and the National Cannabis Industry Association. But where I got my start is all the way back in 1995. I was the Marijuana Policy Project's first volunteer, all the way back in 1995 before California passed medical, and then went on to co-found Students for Sensible Drug Policy, which is now on a few, like 300 to 400 campuses nationwide. And me and Steve D'Angelo from Harborside started ArcView back in 2010, long before the cannabis industry was a twinkle in anyone's eyes, and started doing all this back then. And so it's been quite a wild ride. And boy, we are at a very different place today than we were at any of those other points I just described.
Absolutely. Would the word tipping point be appropriate for what you're seeing right now?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that, if we were to have this interview pretty much at any 6-month interval for the last 5 years, I would tell you the same thing. Oh my God, we're at a tipping point, right? Because it's really been moving that fast. It's really been escalating that fast. It's sort of a whole new ball game just about every 6 months.
Check, totally. And of course, so, where we're at right now or what's got a lot of people, even outside the cannabis space, kind of mesmerized or kind of suddenly waking up is the boom in the publicly listed valuations of the Canadian stocks and a few U.S. companies that have kind of somehow finagled to through one means or another to get listed on a TSX and CSX, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of excitement around the stocks that are listed there, both the U.S. stocks and the Canadian stocks that are listed there. And I think it really goes to show just how much interest from people there is in the cannabis sector, that these valuations have gone so high and so many people are involved in these stocks. I think it illustrates the power of this industry and the belief that the public has in its future. And I think that bodes well from a political standpoint as well, that there's that much support out there. Now, I think any reasonable person would say that these stocks are, for the most part, pretty overvalued. That being said, when you look at previous booms, the difference between where this boom is and where other booms have been is that with cannabis, we actually have an underlying product that people love, and there's a real, you can really see how the market grows and how it grows fast. I mean, we're looking at about a $13 billion market in the world right now, legal market, growing to about a $30 billion market over the next 5 years. It's about a 27% compound annual growth rate. So there's real money to be made here. With real tangible things. When you look at the .com boom or the social networking boom, I mean, this was all based on theory about whether people would change their behavior or whether innovation would happen. And we don't have to worry about people changing their behavior. People love cannabis. Yeah. What we care about is laws changing, and almost all of that growth that we talk about in the next 5 years isn't even coming from new places that are going to pass laws over that time frame. It's mostly the things that have already passed and are either not yet implemented or will be implemented by that time, mainly because it takes a few years for a market to develop. So there's very little amount that's going to pass after now that's really included in that number. So I think it's a very exciting time. I think there's going to be some big ups and downs. I think volatility is sort of part of the equation right now, and I think anybody investing that doesn't believe that is not doing their homework.
I mean, I guess another dimension of this is also some sort of prominent political people kind of jumping over the fences and kind of signing up to be on boards of prominent cannabis companies. Specifically, like I'm thinking of John Boehner, former Congress guy, and of course over here in LA, Villaraigosa, signed on to MedMen. I mean, these are also like indicators of a general direction too, right? Yeah,
I mean, I think former politicians love money, right? I mean, it's like this is what you do, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that they're doing it, I think, is a real testament to the just how mainstream this has become. I mean, latest Pew results just came out today. 62% of Americans support legalizing cannabis, and I think it was the lowest amount of people opposed it at like 33%. So,
yep.
We're at 2-to-1 support to opposition right now.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And almost every way that you slice the demographics, you wind up with a majority of support in favor of legalization. The most interesting one is that, people over the age of 70, or the post-baby boomers, people born before 1950, are really the only generation that is not in favor. And even they've increased their support by a lot. So I think this is a very interesting moment where there's a lot of support, and fundamentally, look, politicians and even former politicians are not going to be the pioneers, right? They're going to follow public sentiment. and the media's been great to us, and the opposition's been silly, and the public opinion is moving in all the right directions, and the sky didn't fall in Colorado and Washington. Everything's just fine. They just have more money. And so I think that bodes well as well. And so I think that gives these folks something to stand on when they come out in favor of these things.
For sure, for sure. Okay, there's a couple directions we could take this. One would be to keep talking about the sort of the major kind of like sweeps or currents with this sort of on the investment and kind of cannabis scale up scene. So like how some of the U.S. companies are trying to are using this RTO strategy to get listings. Or I mean, I have a high level question about adult use versus medical markets and demographics that maybe we could explore too, if you're interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
Either do you have a preference which direction to go in?
No, wherever you want to go.
Okay.
You tell me.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I've been wrangling in terms of some of the meetings that we have coming up. How to there's some tensions people describe within adult use states. How are the medical programs going to be able to hold together and offer something meaningful, and are the patients truly medical patients' needs and rights going to be maintained and serviced well? But I mean, even that, to call it adult use versus medical markets is almost like it's overlooking there's a big gray area where there's this whole baby boomer senior citizen demographic where they're not necessarily being diagnosed for anything specific, but there's a lot of aches and pains that the CBD and THC combos can address. And then there's the broader question of well, isn't all use of cannabis therapeutic at some level? If if it helps you de-stress, chill out. I mean, stress is a source of a lot of other medical issues and symptoms. So maybe it's an artificial distinction to begin with. But those are just a couple. I don't know any thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, I think anytime you expand access for adults and you create more access points and you create more people for whom their use is legal, the more that benefits patients. The one place where it doesn't is around taxes, and if they're unable to create a separate system for serious patients to get reduced taxes. But I think in the end, ultimately, what we need is more sensible taxes, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
If we had, I mean, look, if you go to the pharmacy, you pay tax on your over the counter medicines, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't necessarily have a problem with taxing, but I do have a problem with charging 30%, right? But that's the same for it's more of a problem when it's patients. So I think that there is an opportunity to provide some relief for patients. The other thing is oftentimes it's more about regulations. It's about like allowing people to give away cannabis as well. So I know that there's been a big battle in California over that, which I think just got resolved. So there's definitely things that can be done to make it better on everybody and make it more fair.
Mm-hmm. And how much do you see, like, the expansion of medical research at the different, universities that are starting to set up institutes like UC Irvine, UCLA, other ones, around the U.S. and a couple in Canada. People are starting to try to rig up serious research programs now, and you see all of that information, that the results of that boosting and supporting the overall market and story of cannabis.
Absolutely. it really adds a ton of credibility when really credible universities are doing research, and it also really helps because there's been such a block on research for most of the last 80 years and so there really is a thirst for more information, and I think this is a great development. Another really great development is what's happening in Israel, where Israel has really become a real centerpiece for where a lot of the research that can't be done as easily in the U.S. is being done, and a lot of that is being used to create IP and to create a knowledge that is ultimately going to be applied in the biggest ways here in the U.S.
Check. Should we encroach on the GW getting their Epidiolex downscheduled by the FDA? Do you want to touch on that, or I'm not sure what there is to say about that exactly?
Yeah. So I don't think that's a great. I mean, it's great that they're acknowledging its medical utility. It's not great that they've essentially just given a monopoly to, the very few companies that are able to get a totally safe product through the FDA approval process. I mean, it's a bit of a joke, right? And then a few days later, you had the FDA sending a thing saying that they're like, this is fine, like this is fine, like don't worry about it, like, and so.
Right. It was the DEA that gave did the down scheduling, and then then the FDA came out with a sort of almost contradictory ruling about CBD in general, that it shouldn't be scheduled to begin with. Right.
Exactly. So, I think that's pretty powerful. I mean, this should be. There's no question that CBD should be available over the counter.
Yeah.
No question.
Mm-hmm.
And anywhere. Anything less than that is political posturing and injustice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who disagrees, except for some bureaucrats.
Well, I mean, just to loop it from there back to ArcView for a second. I mean, ArcView doesn't exclude CBD related, like CBD from hemp related business plans or ancillary services to CBD from hemp brands or projects, or?
Yeah, sure. Certainly, we have companies that are in the CBD market come and present and are involved in our group for sure.
Right.
Yeah, actually, I think that's going to be a huge opportunity going forward. I mean, I'm a little surprised actually by how popular and how quickly CBD has become so popular. I mean, I think there's a lot of risk in that too, because you get a lot of snake oil and you get a lot of people that put like the tiniest bit of CBD in something and then expect it to be active, and people are putting CBD in everything now. So I think there needs to be some more standardization and some more clarity about how that CBD is gotten, and clarity around the law and everything else. But there's clearly a huge appetite for CBD products from a wide range of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you want to comment a little bit on just the broad scope of California's sort of centralized distribution approach?